I'm going to share this below the YouTube video. So I have hyperlinks to sources, and I'm going to present some of these sources to you to show you the information that we do not get in our mainstream media that proves that the two-state solution is dead and that our wars have been for Israel. There is a lady, she is a settler, Israeli settler leader, Daniela Weiss. And in the Stone Cold Justice documentary, she mentions the settlements and how Ariel Sharon, who was then Israeli Minister of Agriculture in the 70s, said that he planned to build settlements so that no Palestinian state could be formed. So I want you to hear this. And so I'm going to bring up this clip.
This is the Samaria, and we see here Ma'ale Adumim.
But this will never happen, according to Daniela Weiss, a founder of the settler movement. In the 1970s, Daniela Weiss would regularly meet Ariel Sharon, then Minister for Agriculture, to plan settlements so no Palestinian state could emerge. You and Ariel Sharon were determined there would not be a Palestinian state.
With my many talks with Ariel Sharon and with my work with Ariel Sharon, there was a clear understanding, a very clear planning of spreading the Jewish communities in the way that there will be no option for a Palestinian state in Judea and Samaria.
So there you go. You heard it straight from the settler leader's mouth who worked with Ariel Sharon. And it's instructive to note, is what I put in this article, that Sharon went on to become the Prime Minister of Israel from 2001 to 2006. So if this is the case, and this was a plan since the 70s to build settlements so that no Palestinian state could emerge, then the Oslo Accords was not an honest negotiation to begin with. And this is one thing I do want to bring up. The Prime Minister of Israel at the time of the signing of the Oslo Accords may have actually wanted a two-state solution. I found out, by researching this information, that he was actually assassinated by a Jewish radical. So maybe he did want, maybe there were people in the Israeli government who did want this peaceful solution, but, they assassinated the Israeli prime minister. So maybe this was, to prevent that. I found this article written by Haaretz, and it says, on the clear day in the West Bank, you can see Israel, you lost forever. A visit to a settlement leader whose vision of Israel's future borders includes parts of Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, and even Iran. And the person who said this, the Israeli settler they had interviewed, was none other than Daniela Weiss, the same woman that you just heard say that there was never going to be a Palestinian state in Judea and Samaria. So isn't that interesting? Well, it gets even more interesting because General Wesley Clark, he's an Army general, and he came out in a 2007 Democracy Now! Interview, and he said that after 9/11, he was informed that our government had a plan to take out 7 countries in 5 years. And those countries were Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finally, Iran. Isn't it interesting that the 4 countries that settler leader Daniela Weiss mentioned are on that list? So here I'm going to show you the video of General Wesley Clark.
Right after 9/11, about 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the Joint Staff who used to work for me. And one of the generals called me and he said, "Sir, you got to come in. You got to come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, "No." He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, "We're going to war with Iraq. Why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do." So I said, "Well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to Al-Qaeda?" He said, No. He says, "There's nothing new that way. They just made the decision to go to war with Iraq." He said, "I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we got a good military and we can take down governments." And he said, "I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail." So I came back to see him a few weeks later, And by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, are we still going to war with Iraq? And he said, oh, it's worse than that. He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, and he said, I just got this down from upstairs, meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today. And he said, this is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran.
Okay, so there you go. You heard it. So also what's interesting about this is there was an article written in the 80s. It was called A Strategy for Israel in the 1980s. It was published by now defunct Hebrew language journal, Odigenon, and it basically talks about how they're going to foment sectarian strife within the Middle East in order to break down the Arab states and expand Israel. So it's called the Yin Yang Plan today. And I have the sources and links in here that you can go and look up. And if you're still not convinced, that's okay. I have more for you. I also have another article I'm going to share below the YouTube video that you can go to and click on all the hyperlinks and the evidence that I've collected to prove what is happening. So here's a picture of Benjamin Netanyahu in front of the sign in the occupied Syrian Golan Heights that was gifted by US President Trump to Israel, basically declaring that the land now belongs to Israel. And he's in front of a sign called Trump Heights, where they plan on building a settlement there, by the way. So we're going back to the settlements. Think about that when I'm talking about this, because Danielle Weiss talked about expansionism. She talked about taking over other countries in order to expand Israel. And here you go. Here's an example of this actually happening at this very moment. And in case you don't believe that's what's happening, let me show you an Israeli news source. The Times of Israel reported back in 2017 that ex-defense minister said IS, which is Islamic State, which is ISIS, apologized to Israel for November clash. This isn't just any source or any person saying it. This is the ex-defense minister of Israel saying that ISIS apologized to Israel for a November clash. So why would they apologize to Israel in the Golan Heights, out of all places? This happened in the Syrian Golan Heights, the land that is now gifted to Israel. So was ISIS securing that territory for Israel? Because it most certainly seems that way. And by the way, they try to trick people with different acronyms, but DAESH, D-A-E-S-H, is the Arabic acronym for ISIS. And the fact that Israel had communication with ISIS, I thought this was a radical group who wishes to annihilate the Jewish state, but here you are having a conversation with them. And it seems to me, maybe they were trying to secure that piece of land for Israel. So here we have Efron Helvi, the former director of Mossad, who was interviewed on the Al Jazeera network by British journalist Mehdi Hassan on 31 May of 2016. And here he admits that Israel aids al-Qaeda in Syria, that he has no preference who wins between the Syrian rebels and President Assad. And then he also admits to aiding the terrorist organization and not denying any strategic reasoning behind that support. But the most strange statement that he made in this interview was that Israel has a different relationship with al-Qaeda than the United States because al-Qaeda has never attacked Israel. Isn't that a bizarre statement for an Israeli leader, a former director of Mossad, to say as an excuse to why it's okay for them to aid al-Qaeda in Syria? So that's something I want you to think about. And the video is here and you can watch it for yourself. He says it in the video. I put it up on my blog. And it's not just that. I have some other sources. In January 2019, the Times of Israel reported that IDF chief finally acknowledges that Israel supplied weapons to the Syrian rebels. We know today the Syrian rebels are terrorists. Many were al-Qaeda or ISIS. Also a source, this is an Israeli source, by the way, the US sanctioned an Israeli former general in December 2018 for 150 million worth of arms sales to both sides fighting in South Sudan. And he was fueling the conflict in that impoverished country. And then I make the statement of showing how it's interesting that Syria and Sudan were on the list of the 7 countries that General Wesley Clark had mentioned. So it's starting to look more and more that our wars are for Israel, and we need to wake Americans up to the truth because Israeli sources report on it, their leaders say it, and we need to make Americans aware that this is happening because we need to stop these wars and we need to wake Americans up to the truth. We need to correct this wrong, this evil that has been festering in our government and in the world today. And if we want world peace, we have to be honest with ourselves. You should never have blind loyalty to any government, to any country. And that's what we have with Israel. That is our relationship with Israel. And look where it has us today.